welcome you. Okay, get ready, because this deep dive is taking us somewhere pretty unexpected, I think, right into this mix of history, art, and, well, how we see things.
Yeah, it's a fascinating puzzle. We've got a couple of sources that, might not seem connected at first.
Not at all. So first up, imagine this. The Reading Room Dome in the Library of Congress. The Jefferson Building, just this incredible space.
Huge, dedicated to knowledge. And right there, woven into it, is this painting. It's called Human Understanding, and she's lifting the veil of ignorance.
Right, and there are cherubs there, too, holding like a book of wisdom, offering encouragement. It's all about learning, basically.
It really is a powerful symbol.
And inside that same dome, you've got these 12 big murals, seated figures. They date way back to 1897.
And they're meant to represent these foundational pillars of Western civilization, at least, as seen back then.
Yeah, you've got Egypt representing written records, Judea for religion, Greece is philosophy, Rome is administration. Standard stuff, maybe?
Pretty standard for the time, sure. But
Yeah.
then there's the one that really made us stop and think.
Islam represents physics.
Islam represents physics.
Yeah.
Just let that sink in for a second, you.
I mean, physics. It's the study of matter, energy, how things interact, right?
Yeah.
Asking the really fundamental questions.
Exactly. Like, how did the universe start? Where is it going? Why is the sunshine? What are we actually made of?
So to see Islam specifically linked to that field in an official American building in 1897.
It definitely makes you pause, especially, considering how some conversations go today.
It really does. Which leads us perfectly into our second source. This is an article by Rob Goodman. It's called Enlightenment's Islam, a Necessary Fiction.
And Goodman's piece gives us that crucial historical context. It really digs into why Islam might have been included back then and why it feels so, well, different from modern perceptions.
He kicks it off with this really vivid thought experiment, a fictional protest.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar, like the whole Ground Zero mosque debate, but he applies it to this actual existing mural.
So picture people protesting outside the Library of Congress. Signs saying, "No Islamization USA," demanding the mural comes down.
Objecting to the government, like endorsing Islam in this major public building.
And the chilling part is, Goodman uses real quotes from people like Newt Gingrich, Rudy Giuliani, Sarah Palin.
But taken from that other controversy, right? Repurposed.
Exactly. Expressing outrage, about glorifying Islam near the Capitol, invoking 9/11, Pamela Geller calling it a stab in the eye. It feels really visceral.
It does. But then comes the kicker, the twist.
The mural. It's real.
Yeah.
And it's been there since 1897.
Over 100 years. And back then, no big outcry, no controversy like the one he imagines.
Which is the core question, isn't it? Why was it seemingly okay, even celebrated back then, but the idea feels so inflammatory to some now?
That's what Goodman asks, and that's really our mission today on this deep dive view. We want to unpack that, get into the history behind this kind of weird disconnect.
So let's dig in. What's Goodman's main argument for why things were so different then?
Well, Goodman argues, pretty convincingly, I think, that the Enlightenment, that whole period trying to redefine the West with tolerance, reason, equality, they actually had this surprisingly admiring view of Islam. Maybe not a perfectly accurate one, but admiring nonetheless.
Admiring? How so?
It wasn't necessarily about deep theological understanding. It was more about how Enlightenment thinkers used their idea of Islam.
Used it?
Yeah, they looked at the Muslim world, or their version of it, and saw qualities they wanted for themselves. Tolerance, rationality.
So it became like a mirror or a tool.
Exactly. A tool to critique their own society, particularly the established church and state power in Europe.
Okay, that's interesting. So to really get that, we need to know what came before the Enlightenment, right? What was the typical view?
Oh, it was vastly different. The historian Bernard Lewis makes this point really well. He says, for centuries, Christendom often didn't even want to see Islam as a proper religion.
How did they see it then?
Often in ethnic terms, Muslims were called Arabs, Persians, Moors, Turks, Saracens. It was a way to frame them as other, culturally different, rather than acknowledging, a shared Abrahamic root.
Right. And you see that in culture too, don't you? Like Dante putting Muhammad in hell.
Precisely. In the Inferno, he's depicted as a schismatic, someone who divided Christianity. That was a common view.
And it wasn't just literature. What about like religious texts or sermons?
Well, early European translations of the Quran often just dismissed as fakes, as impostures designed to mislead people.
Wow.
Yeah, and sermons often use Islam as the bad example. A warning against heresy, against false prophets. Look at the book titles from the time.
Like what?
Things like, of the impiety and imposture of paganism and Mohammedanism, or the true nature of imposture fully displayed in the life of Muhammad. Pretty clear where they stood.
Doesn't leave much room for doubt.
Not really. Even John Dryden, a major poet writing just before the Enlightenment really kicked off, used the Meccan prophet in a simile to represent basically evil advice.
Okay, so total negativity, basically. Then how on earth did it flip so dramatically with the Enlightenment? What happened?
It's quite a turnaround. Just, a generation or so later, you start seeing intellectuals writing about Islam in a surprisingly positive way.
Like who? What kind of works?
A key figure is Henri de Boulainvilliers. In 1730, he published a biography, The Life of Muhammad.
Was it different?
Hugely different. He practically showers Muhammad with praise, calls him an incomparable statesman, a lawmaker superior to all those produced by ancient Greece.
Wow. That is a shift from imposter.
A massive shift. And it wasn't just political admiration either. His view of Islamic doctrine itself was, well, remarkably favorable for the time.
How so? Could he convert or something?
No. But listen to this quote. He says about Muhammad's teachings, all he says is true. Without the grace of the Christian revelation, there would be no system of doctrine so plausible as his.
So plausible.
So conformable to the light of reason. So consoling to the righteous. He's basically saying, short of actual Christian revelation, Islam is the most reasonable belief system out there.
That's quite something. So what was driving this? Why this sudden positive reappraisal?
The biggest driver. Probably hostility towards the Catholic Church.
Ah, okay. The old enemy.
Exactly. For many Enlightenment thinkers, the church represented superstition, hierarchy, intolerance, worldly power, everything they were fighting against.
So Islam became a counterargument.
Precisely. They saw it, or chose to see it, as a foil. A creed without mortification or whips, as one put it. They perceived it as lacking the complex theology, the sacraments, the powerful priesthood, the whole hierarchical structure they disliked in Catholicism.
Voltaire liked that aspect, didn't he? The simplicity.
He did. He praised Islam's strict monotheism, the lack of mysteries, as he called them. This idea of a rational, straightforward faith was really appealing.
And this view really influenced Edward Gibbon, the historian who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Hugely. Gibbon spends a lot of time on the rise of Islam in his massive work.
And Gibbon himself wasn't exactly religious, was he?
Not in a traditional sense. He was a skeptic. He couldn't buy into divine prophecy. But he gave Muhammad this sort of complex, almost sympathetic portrayal.
How did he frame him?
He speculated that maybe Muhammad was a genuinely wise man, but perhaps caught in a mixed and middle state between self-illusion and voluntary fraud. Kind of self-deceived, maybe partly opportunistic, but not just a simple imposter.
Okay, still skeptical but nuanced. Did he see positives in Islam itself?
Oh, definitely. Despite his doubts about its origins, Gibbon credited Islam with some major achievements.
Such as?
Wiping out idol worship and human sacrifice in Arabia, making charity mandatory, uniting warring tribes, cutting down on blood feuds, and crucially, for Gibbon, elevating individual conscience over the dictates of a clergy.
That sounds very Enlightenment-friendly.
It really does. He emphasized Islam as the sort of minimalist faith, focused on just two core ideas, the absolute unity of God and the role of Muhammad as his prophet.
Less dogma, more reason.
That's how Gibbon saw it. Its lack of, complex myths and miracles made it seem to him very compatible with reason. He even described the Muslim idea of God in terms that sounded a lot like his own deism.
Deism, remind me.
The belief in a creator God based on reason, without relying on revelation or miracles. Gibbon described the Muslim God as an infinite and eternal being without form or place, present to our most secret thoughts. That resonated with his own views.
So he kind of saw his own beliefs reflected in Islam.
In a way, yes. He found it rational, consistent. He even made this dry, witty comment.
Go on.
He imagined how shocked St. Peter or St. Paul would be if they saw the rituals and complexities of the modern Vatican, compared to what he saw as the unchanging, simple core of Islamic theology over centuries.
Okay, I see. So Gibbon really sets the stage for this more positive Enlightenment view. Islam as a mirror for their own ideals.
Pretty much. He helped position the Mussulman, as they often said, alongside other idealized figures like the noble savage, as a way to critique the flaws they saw in European society.
And others follow this line.
Yeah, later thinkers too. Condorcet, in his Progress of the Human Mind, called Islam the simplest in its dogmas, the least absurd in its practices, and the most tolerant in its principles. High praise indeed.
It really is. And hearing that compared to some of the rhetoric
Yeah.
You know, Michelle Bachmann's comments, things like that.
Mm.
It's just such a stark contrast. What happened?
Well, Goodman warns us not to just think of it as things were good, now they're bad. It's more complicated.
How so?
He points out, drawing on scholars like Edward Said and his idea of Orientalism, that these Enlightenment thinkers weren't necessarily engaging with Islam in a deep, truly authentic way.
Orientalism.
Yeah.
That's the idea of the West kind of projecting its own fantasies or biases onto the East, right?
Exactly. Romanticizing or distorting it to fit their own needs. Bernard Lewis, who had his own arguments with Say but was a major historian of Islam, also noted Gibbon didn't really know the Muslim world firsthand. He argued Gibbon oversimplified a really diverse, complex faith.
So the Enlightenment view, while positive, was maybe a bit superficial, based on what they wanted Islam to be.
You could definitely argue that. They were projecting their ideals onto it. The reality of Islamic history, schisms, powerful religious figures, complex legal traditions, didn't always fit that neat picture of a simple, rational, uncorrupted faith they imagined.
Right. Lewis even said that a lot of Gibbon's praise wouldn't actually sit well in many Muslim countries.
Precisely. Islam wasn't just deism in disguise. It had its own rich, complex history and theology.
So maybe the story isn't about falling from a golden age of understanding. Maybe it's more about a depressing consistency.
How do you mean?
Well, the West consistently using the idea of Islam as a tool for its own internal arguments, whether it's using a positive image to bash the church, like in the Enlightenment.
Or using a negative image today to rally against perceived enemies.
Yeah, it's always about scoring points in our own debates using this external other.
That's a really crucial point Goodman makes. This long tradition seems to exist, using Islam as a proxy in Western cultural battles. The Enlightenment deployment was positive, sure, but it was still deployment for their own ends, arguing for what they saw as a more rational world.
Which brings us back to that Gibbon quote
Mm-hmm.
about the Muslim creed being compounded of an eternal truth and a necessary fiction.
Yeah.
Goodman flips it. He suggests maybe that phrase, necessary fiction, actually describes the Enlightenment's own view of Islam better. It was a useful story they told themselves to advance their project.
A powerful thought. So that image on the dome, Islam represents physics, it really captures that specific moment in time, doesn't it?
It does. Late 19th century America, still influenced by those Enlightenment ideals, maybe coupled with a recognition of the actual scientific achievements during Islam's golden age.
Right. That's a good point, too. There was definitely knowledge of contributions in maths, astronomy, optics. So linking Islam to physics, the study of the natural world, maybe wasn't that much of a stretch for them then. It reflects that specific blend of historical admiration and perhaps idealized projection.
And it's just wild to think that this symbol, standing there uncontroversially for a century,
Could trigger that kind of hypothetical outrage Goodman described, mirroring real modern controversies. It shows how much the discourse has shifted.
absolutely. And it wasn't just physics, right? The other figures represented things like poetry, fine arts, commerce, law. It's like a snapshot of what that era valued as the foundations of their civilization.
It truly is. Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty big question to chew on, I think.
Yeah.
Knowing this history, this context,
Mm.
how does it change how you think about the debates happening now? About the West and Islam, about interpreting history, about monuments and symbols?
What does it tell us about our own biases today? Are we still creating our own necessary fictions, maybe without even realizing it?
Something to definitely reflect on.